My son said, "You'll just embarrass us in front of everyone." After I paid for all the expenses of my grandson's wedding, they erased me from the wedding guest list. They planned to use my home as a backdrop for their perfect image. So I did something unexpected right before the wedding. Everyone was surprised. Everything stopped. I often tell myself that a house can carry memories as much as people do. The Vanderbilt estate, with its stone facade wrapped in ivy and its long, sweeping driveway, stands like an old aristocrat in Greenwich, Connecticut. After George passed 10 years ago, I have been the lone keeper of this grand place. Each corner is a reminder of his presence and his absence alike. Resilience becomes my armor. I manage the estate's endless upkeep. The lawyers, the gardeners, the charity committees that still come knocking. Outwardly, I remain Celeste Vanderbilt, dignified lady of the house. Inwardly, there are evenings when I sit in the conservatory and trace George's handwriting in the margins of his books, just to remind myself that love once filled these halls. My son, Benjamin, comes by only when there is something to be gained. At 42, he is everything society admires: sharp, decisive, successful, a hedge fund manager with the right suits and the right connections. But when I look at him, I rarely see the boy I raised. I see the man the world has rewarded for being ruthless. He speaks in numbers, not emotions, and his visits are punctuated more by instructions than conversations. Megan, his wife, accompanies him sometimes. She enters the house as though it were a showroom, not a home. At 38, she is glamorous, immaculately turned out, with eyes that scan for imperfections. Where I see heritage in the old oak paneling, she sees outdated decor. Her remarks are always cloaked as suggestions. "You really ought to modernize this wing, Mother." But her tone carries the sting of dismissal. And then there is Zane, my grandson. 24, handsome in the careless way of the young, with an easy charm that once made me hope he might bridge the gap between us. He does love me. I do not doubt that. Yet I also know he has been molded by his parents' values. Image matters to him. Perception matters. The currency of love has been traded for the currency of appearances. It was on a late autumn afternoon that I was walking down the west corridor, the parquet floors creaking softly under my step, when I heard voices from the drawing room. Benjamin's deep baritone, clipped and precise, and Megan's smoother, colder lilt. They were discussing Zane's engagement to Chloe, the social media starlet who has millions of followers and the kind of fame that needs no substance. The wedding, it seemed, was to be nothing short of a spectacle. Imported orchids, celebrity chefs, an orchestra flown in from Vienna. Every detail was being orchestrated as if it were a financial merger, with Megan as the project manager and Benjamin as the financier. And then, between talk of guest lists and seating charts, came the remark that froze me where I stood. "She'll just embarrass us in front of everyone," Benjamin said, flatly. Megan gave a small laugh, the kind that cuts sharper than any insult. "Yes, darling. Your mother is sweet in her way, but her manners, her simplicity, it won't fit with the image we need. Better she remains in the background." I stood there, my hand on the carved banister, heart pounding like I had run a mile. They spoke of me as though I were a relic, a piece of furniture that no longer matched the room. I felt the blood rush to my face, the humiliation burning deep. But I did not step inside to confront them. I turned quietly and walked away, each step echoing through the empty hall. That evening, I sat alone in the conservatory, the last of the sunlight slanting through the glass, and I thought about how easily one can be erased from the lives one has built. The house, the wealth, the name, all of it had been guarded for their sake, and now, my very presence was considered a stain on their perfect canvas. It was then I realized something important. They might see me as powerless, as an outdated woman clinging to the past. But the estate, this house, the legacy, it is still mine. And so, in that silence heavy with betrayal, I held on to my dignity, like a weapon, waiting for its time. I had hoped that the words I overheard were spoken in a moment of frustration, but the hope did not survive long. A week later, Benjamin came to the estate, his voice brisk, even before he had set down his briefcase. Megan followed behind him, her perfume arriving before her words. The air thick with that manufactured sweetness. Benjamin did not waste time. His eyes, sharp and cool, fixed on me. "Mother," he said, "we've discussed this at length. It is best if you don't attend Zane's wedding. You'll just embarrass us in front of everyone." Embarrass them? I sat very still, as though any movement might betray the crack forming inside me. Megan leaned forward then, her voice laced with condescension. "Celeste, please understand. You are charming, in your way, but quaint. Too quaint. The guest list is highly curated. Influencers, CEOs, foreign dignitaries. We cannot risk you seeming out of place." I forced my lips into something like a smile, but my throat tightened with humiliation. "I see," I said. Though I saw far more than they realized. As if to twist the knife further, Benjamin added. "Besides, the savings you kept with me have already been put to good use. We secured a celebrity photographer, orchids imported from Singapore, and of course, private security. It's what's expected." I felt my hands tremble, and I pressed them together in my lap so they would not see. My savings, the money I had trusted him with, meant for Zane's future, for his education, perhaps his first home. It was gone, squandered on spectacle and vanity. My mind reeled back, unbidden, through the years. I remembered the day I sold my mother's sapphire necklace, a piece of history, to pay Benjamin's tuition when his scholarship fell short. I remembered pawning George's gold watch to cover a failed investment Benjamin had made in his 30s. I remembered writing check after check when Zane's boarding school bills piled up, telling myself it was worth it, that the boy's bright future depended on it. And here I was now, being told that my very presence was unworthy of their new world. That evening, I drove to the cemetery where George rests. I knelt, brushing away the fallen leaves from the headstone, and my chest ached with the words I had to force out. "George," I whispered, my breath clouding in the cold air. "Did we raise them wrong? Did I? Everything we worked for, everything we sacrificed, was it in vain?" When I returned home, the estate loomed around me. Silent, but not comforting. My steps carried me past the library, where George's books still stood, and down the corridor where the voices of my son and daughter-in-law once echoed. And it was there again, in that same place, that I overheard them once more. They were discussing logistics this time. Megan's laugh rang like glass. "The estate will be perfect for the photos. Everyone will be impressed. Old money charm, it looks so authentic." Benjamin agreed. "Of course. Mother will allow it. What else does she have to do?" I stood frozen, listening to the casual entitlement in their voices. They had no doubt I would comply. They had already erased me from the wedding. Now they intended to use the estate itself, as though I were nothing more than its caretaker. Something shifted within me then, sharp as the crack of ice on a winter lake. For the first time in years, my grief gave way to something stronger. Resolve. They thought me powerless, quaint, outdated. But the truth was different. The estate was still mine, and so was my dignity. I woke to the creak of the old shutters and the pale light filtering through lace curtains. And something inside me whispered that I could no longer sit quietly, waiting for their scraps of kindness. It was Winifred who gave shape to that whisper. She has been my friend for more than 4 decades. Sharp-witted, always practical, and never afraid to cut to the bone of a problem. We sat together in the sunroom of her modest but elegant house, porcelain teacups between us. I told her everything. From Benjamin's words that still echoed like a slap, to Megan's laughter that had reduced me to nothing more than a nuisance. My voice cracked once, but Winifred only leaned forward, her eyes fierce. "Celeste," she said firmly, "you've spent your life protecting that estate for them. And look at how they repay you. Sell it." The words hung in the air like a challenge. I nearly laughed. The thought seemed so radical. Sell the Vanderbilt estate? The house George's grandfather had built? The gardens we had restored? The rooms still filled with family portraits? It felt like betrayal. But as Winifred poured another cup of tea, she pressed on. Listen to me. That house has become your prison. They don't respect it. They don't respect you. Why should you keep carrying it on your shoulders? Free yourself. Let them see that what they take for granted is not theirs to own. Her words lodged deep inside me, painful, yes, but liberating in their clarity. By the time I left her house, the autumn wind stinging my cheeks, the decision had already begun to crystallize. 2 days later, I made the first call. There was a developer, a man named Harrington, who had been circling the estate for years. His offers had always been politely declined, but I knew he would not hesitate now. Within hours, his people were walking the grounds, measuring, photographing, smiling like predators who had finally found a weak spot. We met in the library. Harrington laid the contract before me. Speaking of conversions, luxury condominiums, modern amenities, his words barely registered. What mattered was the figure at the bottom of the page. Enough money to secure a future, to start something new, to make one final gesture that mattered. With a steady hand, I signed. The pen scratched across the paper, and with it, decades of weight lifted from me. From that moment, I carried two faces. The first, the one my son and daughter-in-law saw, a compliant, aging woman who nodded politely when they arrived to survey the estate for the photo shoot. I even allowed Megan to prattle on about which rooms would look most aesthetic. I smiled. I agreed. I played the role they assigned me, but beneath that mask was the second face. The true one. The woman who had already taken their stage away, who had shifted the ground beneath their feet while they posed on illusions. It was a strange duality, guilt pressing at me for letting go of a place so tied to George, and yet a growing surge of empowerment for refusing to be disposable. That night, I sat in George's study, the lamp casting a pool of light on the desk. I took a sheet of paper and wrote a letter I would never send. My dearest George, I cannot carry them any longer. They see me as a burden, an inconvenience. I have given them everything: your watch, my mother's necklace, the years of my life, and still, it is not enough. So I am letting go, my love. Not of you, never of you, but of this house they worship for its image, while despising the woman who keeps it. I will honor our name differently, in a way they cannot erase. Forgive me if this feels like betrayal. I promise you, it is survival. When I put down the pen, tears blurred the ink. But I felt lighter than I had in years. The game had changed. They did not know it yet, but the stage they intended to use had already been dismantled. They arrived on a Friday afternoon, Benjamin at the front with his brisk walk, Megan just behind in her designer heels, and a small entourage of wedding planners trailing after them with clipboards and cameras. I stood in the entryway, the doors of the estate wide open, the autumn light slanting across the marble floor. For a moment, it struck me as absurd how little reverence they had for the house that had carried their very name for generations. To them, it was not legacy. It was a prop. Megan's voice was the first to pierce the air. "Celeste, darling," she cooed, though her eyes were already darting about critically. "This room. The wallpaper is a bit faded, don't you think? We'll need drapes, maybe in ivory. And those chandeliers, classic, yes, but terribly dated. If we bring in a lighting designer, we can soften the tones for the photographs." Her words slid over me like ice water. I smiled faintly, nodding as though her opinions mattered. In truth, each comment only hardened the resolve that pulsed quietly within me. Benjamin's tone was no less arrogant, though less flamboyant. He gestured toward the dining hall. "We'll set the family portraits there. Guests will love the history, and it will lend an air of authenticity to the brand we're projecting." His words, "brand we're projecting," landed like stones. Family reduced to a marketing device. And then Zane wandered in. Tall, handsome, the very image of careless youth. He hugged me lightly, the warmth brief, almost hurried. "Grandma," he said with that easy grin, "don't take all this too personally. Mom and Dad just want things to look perfect. You know how it is." The casual cruelty of that remark nearly undid me. Don't take it personally. As though being erased from his wedding was nothing more than a scheduling mishap. I patted his arm. masking the sting. Of course, Zane, I understand. My voice did not falter. My smile did not waver. Inside, however, I felt the familiar ache of love bruised beyond recognition. For the next hour, I followed them through the estate, nodding when asked, opening doors when needed. Megan's voice never ceased. A stream of observations about angles, lighting, colors. Benjamin kept making calls, his words filled with transactions and deadlines. And I, quiet Celeste, stood in the background, the very role they had assigned me. They believed I was irrelevant. That evening, after the last planner had clicked shut her clipboard and left, I closed the heavy oak doors and stood alone in the grand hall. The silence returned, and with it, the weight of what I had done. The sale was finalized. Harrington's lawyers had confirmed it. In just a matter of days, the estate would no longer be mine, or theirs. It would belong to strangers, with plans of tearing down walls and raising towers of glass in its place. Grief washed over me. Sharp and relentless, every corner of this house carried George's voice, his laughter, the imprint of our life together. To let it go felt like tearing out a piece of myself. Yet mingled with the sorrow was something startling relief. For the first time in years, I was not bound to their expectations or their contempt. The burden of upkeep, the chains of obligation, the constant sting of being used and dismissed it, would all end. I placed my hand on the carved banister one last time, whispering to the house itself, as though it might understand. Thank you for holding me all these years. Now it is time to let go. And in that quiet, I steeled myself. The storm was coming, and I was ready to stand in the middle of it, unafraid. The day of Zane's wedding dawned bright and golden, the kind of morning that photographers pray for. I sat alone in my modest apartment, a cup of coffee cooling untouched beside me, as the headlines on my phone filled with names and faces I once knew. Limousines lined the streets of Greenwich. Guests in glittering gowns and tailored suits spilled into the sprawling grounds of the venue. CEOs, politicians, socialites, an audience curated for spectacle, not family. I was not there. My name had been deliberately left off the guest list, though my absence became a topic in itself. From what I later heard, whispers swirled like perfume around the reception hall. She's far too eccentric to appear, one woman speculated. She clings to the old ways, you know. Always so quaint. Megan, I am told, smiled at such remarks, lifting her glass with the elegance of a queen whose strategy had been vindicated. She let them believe I had chosen exile, when the truth was far sharper. Benjamin thrived in that crowd. He shook hands, gave speeches, laughed too loudly at jokes that were not funny. Megan floated at his side, a vision in silver, every gesture rehearsed for the cameras. Zane, poor boy, looked dazzling and empty all at once, his arm linked with Chloe's, their smiles wide enough for magazine covers. On the surface, it was perfection. Beneath it, the cracks waited. The moment came when the photographer announced it was time for the most anticipated part of the day, the Vanderbilt estate photo shoot. Guests murmured with delight. Of course, it made sense. What better backdrop than an ivy-draped mansion that whispered of old money and prestige? Megan had boasted for weeks that those photographs would crown the event. But when the photographer and his crew arrived at the estate gates, the story shifted. Instead of sweeping lawns and poised elegance, they found chaos. Bulldozers parked in the driveway, surveyors walking the grounds with blueprints in hand, and at the center of it all, a gleaming sold sign planted firmly in the earth. I imagine the scene as it was told to me later, the photographer blinking in disbelief, assistants snapping pictures not of grandeur, but of demolition machinery. A foreman in a hard hat politely explained that ownership had transferred days ago. The Vanderbilt estate was no longer the Vanderbilt estate at all. Benjamin was called immediately. His voice, sharp enough to cut glass, carried through the venue as he demanded explanations. Harrington's office confirmed the sale with cool efficiency. The estate had been signed over, contracts executed, funds transferred. Nothing could be undone. Panic rippled through the wedding like a cold wind. The photographer returned, flustered, muttering about ruined schedules. Guests began to murmur again, but this time the whispers were edged with amusement. Phones lifted discreetly. Photos of the sold sign appeared on social media within minutes. Hashtags bloomed. Vanderbilt Fall, sold not staged. Megan's smile faltered for the first time that day. She tried to salvage dignity, claiming there had been a misunderstanding, but her voice cracked under the strain. Benjamin stormed out, his fury unmistakable, while Chloe's carefully curated smile collapsed under the weight of humiliation. Even Zane looked bewildered, caught between loyalty and shame. From my apartment, I watched the story unfold online. Each update a fresh reminder that the power had shifted. The house they had mocked me for clinging to was no longer theirs to exploit. The legacy they had taken for granted had been pulled out from under them, not with shouting or scandal, but with a single signature. I sat back, the hum of quiet around me sharper than any applause. They had built a wedding upon the illusion of perfection. I had merely taken away the stage, and now the world was watching them stumble, masks slipping, reputations crumbling in real time. For the first time in many years, I did not feel erased. I felt present. In every whisper, every headline, every laugh behind a raised champagne glass. My absence had become my power. It was late evening when they came. I heard the sharp pounding on the door before I even rose from my chair. My new apartment was modest. 2 bedrooms, soft cream walls, a balcony that looked out over the town square, but it had a dignity that came from simplicity, not grandeur. I had chosen it deliberately, a space I could breathe in without the weight of history pressing down. The pounding came again, louder, urgent. When I opened the door, Benjamin burst inside, his face red with fury. Megan followed, her heels striking the floor like gunshots, her expression twisted with outrage. Zane trailed behind, his tie loosened, his face pale, as though he had aged years since the morning. "How dare you?" Benjamin's voice cracked like a whip. "You sold the estate? Our estate? On his wedding day?" I closed the door gently, the contrast almost comical against their storming. I walked back toward the sitting area, where a single lamp glowed warmly. "Yes," I said evenly, "I sold my estate. Not yours." Megan's laugh was brittle, high-pitched, a sound that belonged more to panic than amusement. "Do you have any idea what you've done? We were humiliated, Celeste. The photographers, the guests they saw bulldozers and a sold sign. People are mocking us online. We're a laughingstock." I looked at her, calm in a way that surprised even me. "You mean you are mocked?" I said softly. "Not me." Benjamin leaned forward, hands clenched, his fury a physical force. "This was betrayal. Pure betrayal. After all we've done for you, after all I've managed." I cut him off, my voice sharper than I intended. "After all you've taken. My savings, Benjamin. Money I set aside for Zane's future, for his education, for his life. Do you remember? You used it for orchids, photographers, security guards. You dressed your vanity in my sacrifices and expected me to smile as you shut me out." For a moment, silence fell. Megan's lips parted, but no words came. Benjamin blinked, caught between anger and something that looked uncomfortably like shame. I stood then, the lamplight catching the silver strands of my hair, and I looked them both in the eye. "You wanted a perfect image," I said, steady as stone. "Now you have nothing." The words hung in the room, final and heavy. Megan flinched. Benjamin's jaw tightened, but his eyes faltered. From my chair, I reached for the newspaper I had set aside earlier. Across the front page was a photo from the wedding, Chloe and Zane smiling awkwardly under strings of lights, while online feeds buzzed with ridicule. "Vanderbilt Fall," one caption read, another, "Sold, not staged." The cruel humor of strangers had already devoured their perfect day. Chloe, I had heard, was livid. She had snapped at Zane before the cake was even cut, furious that the wedding lacked the glamour she had promised her followers. Her brand had suffered, and in her world, that mattered more than vows. By nightfall, the internet had transformed the Vanderbilt name from old prestige into cheap entertainment. Zane stood apart now, near my balcony doors, his face drawn. "Grandma," his voice broke, uncertain. I didn't know they'd done that with your money. I didn't know they planned to keep you away. I studied him. The boy I once carried on my hip. The man who had smiled at me with such carelessness just days before. His shoulders slumped. This isn't who I want to be, he whispered, more to himself than to me. And then, without another word, he turned and left, the door closing softly behind him. Benjamin swore under his breath. Megan muttered something about lawyers, though even she seemed to know the fight was already lost. They left together, their anger trailing after them like smoke. Alone again, I sat down, my heart steady, my breath even. I felt no triumph, no gloating satisfaction, only a quiet certainty that I would no longer be diminished. They had tried to erase me, but I had drawn my own line in history, and this time, it was my dignity that remained unshaken. The estate was gone, yes, but its loss no longer felt like an ending. It felt like release. What had once been the weight of generations had turned into the seed of something new. With the proceeds from the sale, I established the George Vanderbilt Scholarship Fund, a living legacy, not a crumbling mansion. The papers carried the story within days. Widow honors late husband by supporting education for underprivileged youth. My photograph, simple and unadorned, appeared beside the article, a contrast to the glossy coverage of the wedding debacle. For once, my name was not linked to whispers of exclusion or eccentricity, but to generosity. When the first group of scholarship recipients gathered at a small dinner I hosted, I felt a warmth I had not known in years. They were bright-eyed, nervous young men and women, many of them the first in their families to attend college. They handed me letters, written in shaky but earnest handwriting, thanking me for opportunities they never thought possible. One girl pressed an envelope into my palm. "Mrs. Vanderbilt," she said softly, "you don't know me, but this scholarship, it will change everything. For me, for my family." Her words pierced me deeper than Benjamin's insults ever had, because they carried gratitude instead of disdain. I smiled at her, blinking away the sting in my eyes. That night, when the last plate had been cleared and the laughter of students still echoed in my ears, I sat in my new apartment and reread their letters. Each one felt like a piece of George returned to me, his belief in hard work, his quiet generosity, his sense of responsibility. For the first time since his passing, I felt I had honored him not by preserving stone and timber, but by carrying forward his values into lives that needed them most. Meanwhile, the world that Benjamin and Megan had so carefully built began to crumble. At galas, their names were whispered with derision. "The Vanderbilts, did you see what happened at that wedding? Society thrives on scandal, and theirs was delicious." Megan tried to hold her chin high, to dismiss the ridicule, but her smirk no longer carried weight. Benjamin grew quieter at public events, his arrogance dulled by mockery. Zane came to me one evening, unannounced. He stood in my doorway, uncertain, stripped of the careless charm he once wielded so easily. "Grandma," he said, his voice low, "I'm sorry. I let them tell me who you were, instead of remembering who you are." I studied him for a long moment. He was young, yes, but not blind anymore. His shame was genuine. I touched his arm gently. "I forgive you, Zane. But forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. If you want to be part of my life, you must walk on your own terms, not theirs." "I have it knowedly face." He nodded, his eyes glistening, and for the first time in years, I believed he might find his own path. The seasons turned, and with spring came the opening of the George Vanderbilt Community Garden, funded by the Scholarship Trust. Rows of tulips and daisies bloomed where concrete had once reigned. Children laughed among the beds of flowers, students volunteered to plant vegetables, and a small plaque bearing George's name stood at the entrance, catching the afternoon sun. I walked there often. On one such day, I paused by the roses, their petals trembling in the breeze, and felt a peace I had not known in years. Laughter, soil on young hands, the smell of blossoms. Somewhere across town, I knew Benjamin and Megan were still scrolling through their phones, watching the endless stream of jokes, memes, and articles mocking their fall from grace. Trapped in the prison of their own image, they had no escape. I smiled, not in triumph, but in quiet contentment. I had chosen legacy over vanity, dignity over humiliation. And in the chorus of children's voices drifting through the garden, I finally heard the answer. George had never spoken. This was what family was meant to be. I learned that sometimes the greatest act of love for yourself is letting go of what others take for granted. For years, I carried the weight of a house, of sacrifices, of a family that saw me as background rather than blood. Selling the estate was not revenge, it was reclaiming my dignity. Legacy is not bricks and chandeliers. It's the lives you touch and the respect you demand for yourself. If this speaks to your heart, tap like, subscribe for more first-person grandma revenge stories, and tell me in the comments which moment struck you the most.